Welcome to the New England Holstein Association's podcast series. We are on episode 11. The mission statement of the New England Holstein Association indicates that it's a member organization dedicated to encouraging the breeding and raising of registered Holsteins. In this podcast, intends to provide resources toward those ends while increasing member connectedness. This episode is sponsored by the Eastern States Exposition. I'm your host, Betsy Bullard of Breguin Farms in Turner, Maine, and Area 1 Director for Holstein USA. Each podcast will feature one or more members and guests discussing timely topics from breeder perspectives, marketing activities, on-farm technologies and management strategies to youth highlights, and numerous things in between. Guests will have homework for each episode, possibly naming an iconic New England cow or a favorite cow, and sharing stories about their connections to our New England agriculture. Today's episode features a conversation with Eugene Cassidy, President and CEO of Eastern States Exposition, and Ashley Randle, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. We look forward to discussing agriculture at the Eastern States Expo and the role those events have in the larger agricultural community in Massachusetts and beyond. Ashley, welcome to the podcast and thanks for joining us today. I know fall's a busy time for all of us. If you like to share a bit of your story with our listeners and talk about some of the things that brought you to the role that you serve in today. You're what, 2.5 years into your role as commissioner?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me, Betsy. It's great to be here. And certainly knowing you for a long time, I've enjoyed listening to the podcasts and kind of going back down memory lane with a lot of your prior guests. For those that are listening, I actually grew up in Western Massachusetts, about 35 minutes north of Eastern States Exposition on Indian Acres Farm. I'm the fifth generation on my family's dairy and grew up showing Holstein and Guernsey cattle at the Big E, as we affectionately know it, across New England and across the country. Really, the time at the Big E and growing up in the 4-H dairy program were instrumental in my career journey with a lot of the connections that I was able to make at the fair. They are lifelong connections. And as I was looking at career opportunities and really what I wanted to do that would combine agriculture and policy and law, I realized that I wanted to be on a dairy judging team. And so I was fortunate to attend Cornell University and be part of the dairy judging team there in 2010. From there, I attended law school right out of Cornell and focused on sustainability and environmental law, knowing that I didn't want to be a practicing attorney in the courtroom. I wanted to find a way to be able to help farmers and give back to the industry. And so I started a career in public service and state government. And I started actually with the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I was there for 3 years. And during that time, it actually brought me back to the Big E, and I managed the main building on site. So I was at the fair for about 23 or 24 days, with setup and tear down and working with the main building vendors. So it was nice to see the fair from a different perspective than I previously had. And then I was fortunate to go work for the Northeast Dairy Producers Association for a short time before the opportunity came to move back to Massachusetts. In 2018, I was offered the Deputy Commissioner and Legislative and Policy Director role at the department. And I was in that role for about 4.5 years, and then was very fortunate when Governor Healy came in to be appointed commissioner in March of 2023. I will say that throughout my career, it has always been ag focused and finding ways to help farmers. At the end of the day, in my job, that's really what drives me, using that as my North Star and knowing the experiences that family and friends have had in the industry and using that to inform my decision making in my current role.
Thanks for sharing a bit of your path to your current role. And I think it's certainly worthy of mention. I believe you're the first female commissioner for the state of Massachusetts.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Eastern States Expo, since certainly we both have some shared history there, and it's a quite an iconic event for those of us in New England and beyond. I think when I think of the Big E, I think of attending ever since I was a little kid and it all seeming huge, and it is huge. I think we had over 1.6 million visitors last year, making it the fourth largest fair in North America, which is pretty mind-boggling to think of, that this is our kind of our hometown traditional event that we attend, and it has that kind of scope. And I think when we look at the Eastern States Exposition has kind of as its mission and stated set of goals. It's committed to excellence in providing year-round opportunities for the development and promotion of agriculture, education, industry, and family entertainment while preserving our New England heritage. How does that take on, or does it take on a little bit of a different light in your current role as commissioner? And how does that set of activities with both the fair and then another over 120 other events occurring during the year on the fairgrounds? How does that figure in some of your activities?
So I will say, similar to you, Betsy, as you mentioned, just growing up, exhibiting at the fair and seeing it from an exhibitor attendee perspective has helped me now in my current role as our department manages the Massachusetts State Building on the Avenue of States. Really, what we're doing there is trying to support small businesses, similar to supporting farms across the state, and making sure that there's that opportunity to showcase and highlight agriculture from across the state. And when I think back to the dairy competitions, you have exhibitors coming from all across the country for the opportunity to showcase their livestock or their exhibits at the fair. And it really is those connections that are cultivated at the fair that aren't for the few days that you're there or the week that you're there, beyond months and years. And from there, it's the relationships. And I see that in my current role as well, in being able to support the farms that want to exhibit at the Big E or at other agricultural fairs across the state and region, and also for our Massachusetts building vendors. Those 17 days drive their business for the entire year. For some of them, the 17 days that they're there are the majority of their income for their business for the year. And it is because of the 1.6 million people that you see coming through the fairgrounds, and many are visiting the Avenue of States. And then when you go across the fairgrounds and you're at the Mallory complex and you see all of the different agricultural exhibits, it ties it all together. Many of the state buildings have agricultural commodities that are represented in their buildings. We have farmers markets, we have maple, we have dairy, we have the state grange and our seafood industry. And then when you can go across the fairgrounds and make that connection with agriculture and see farmers exhibiting their animals, it really is a full circle moment. And I think back, just a short story, when my parents were showing there and the connections that my mom made and my grandfather in 1995. So I was a younger show person at that time. My grandfather and my mom saw a cow that ended up showing, and they loved the cow from a farm in Maine, Wabanaki Farm and the Whitcomb family. And that was really the foundation for then my Guernsey herd and growing up, and the Guernseys that came from that family line. And so I think those connections really speak volumes of what the impact the fair has in terms of agriculture.
Connections, it's a word that you've used a couple times, and it's been a thread throughout our podcast episodes, both the connections between farms, the connections between our members and friends of our industry. So it's a pretty fascinating thread that runs through all of our activities. And we referred a couple times in the conversation to those state buildings. For maybe the casual listener that's not as familiar with the expo as you and I are, each New England state has on the fairgrounds a replica of their state capitol building. you have experience in both the Maine building and now the Massachusetts building as well. What do you think of as some of the iconic, state related products? And I'm thinking of course, the Maine baked potato with lines that, look longer than I-95 through there. What are some of the other ones that really end up on fairgoers' top 10 lists of things to check out?
So with the state buildings, they are all very unique. When I think of Maine, as you said, the baked potato and blueberries and lobster rolls, I would say Vermont, you think of Vermont maple, Cabot cheddar cheese. And then when you go to New Hampshire, they have Zach's mac and cheese, which has become famous. And a lot of fairgoers will go for the mac and cheese. With Rhode Island, the seafood. Connecticut's a bit of everything. I know they have a competitive baked potato as well with Maine, but I won't choose favorites, so I won't name which one is my favorite. But with Massachusetts, I think a lot of people come to the building for both our maple as well as seafood that we have represented in the building, the dairy that we have represented in the building. We have local breweries that are using hops and grains that they're growing and putting into the beer that they produce. So trying to make those connections with the products. And I think each of the state buildings is so unique. And it's fun to see year after year those staple items that are there, but also the new vendors and the new businesses that are coming in and creating new products or items to showcase and sell.
That's an exciting process, and I appreciate you describing earlier kind of that physical aspect of the fair where this Avenue of the States is literally on one end of the fairgrounds and the animal exhibits are on the other end. So it makes for an interesting, as you said, an interesting kind of point of connection to check out both of those and see the starting point and the, I don't want to say ending point, but a little bit further down the line than our dairy cattle and sheep and beef actually on the hoof, so to speak. What makes Eastern States Expo unique?
Being New England's fair, I think, again, connections and collaboration among the six New England states. It really is something when I talk to my colleagues in other states, they all want to know about the Big E because it's not your traditional state fair, it's New England's fair. And so they all are curious how that works and what that looks like for each of the states' involvement, and certainly the Avenue of States, but also the 4 H competitions, the FFA competitions, the friendly competition that is instilled in people that attend the 4 H and FFA competitions. And amongst the state buildings, we're all a little competitive. And I think growing up showing cattle, I've brought that competitiveness to the mass building as well in what we try to do year after year. But I think that when you look at Eastern States Exposition and the number of events, as you mentioned, that they host throughout the year, that or equine shows and the horse shows or dairy cattle sales and other shows in the springtime, I think those opportunities are really what makes it special, is because it is throughout the year. They're hosting events. It's not just 17 days in September. It's finding continuous ways to bring more people into agriculture to learn, to attend the shows, either maybe get into exhibiting animals. They may attend a sale at the fairgrounds and purchase their first calf, and that's how they get into showing dairy cattle or attending a show and seeing what it's like and all the hard work that goes into getting to the fair and exhibiting your animals, and they become more interested in that. It really is about showcasing agriculture at the end of the day. Certainly, there is the economic impact, which I'm sure Jean will touch upon. But when you look at the impacts that continue on throughout the year, just in the local economies across the region, I think that's really important to highlight as well, because it's not just impacting Massachusetts economy. It's going into the other New England states. It's really trying to uplift the region and bring all of the states into the fold so that we can always continue to make it New England's fair and really maintain that focus.
You mentioned earlier you feel like many of the small businesses that are your exhibitors in the state building, and I'm sure that's not unique to the Massachusetts building, that each of the state buildings, for some of those vendors, that's a tremendous chunk of their annual income from their particular unique product. So that's a pretty huge boost in exposure to those over 1 million people that happen to wander through the fairgrounds, which is a pretty tremendous sort of impact to think about.
And I would say too, when you look at many of the livestock exhibitors, they're small businesses or small farms by most standards. And so for them, it may not be about the premium check at the end of the day. Again, it goes back to the connections and being able to maybe down the road sell an animal to another exhibitor that starts those genetic lines in another herd, or other connections within the industry that have long-term benefits.
Over the course of the last years, and I won't say any specific number because it could be any number. Certainly agriculture has changed in the region. We see those changes in Maine, across New England, and in Massachusetts specifically. We obviously have seen a change in what agriculture looks like. What impact has that had, or opportunities has it created for those businesses that are involved in some way with the expo?
I would say that diversification is one of the main things we've seen on farms. Farmers are resilient and always trying to find ways to adapt their business models. Over the last 5, 10, 15 years, the diversification across our vegetable sector, our dairy sector has really come to light. So, for instance, you may have a dairy that's now bottling their own milk, making cheese or ice cream. They're not only bringing cattle to the show to exhibit them, but they're also competing in cheese competitions that are held at the expo, or their milk is used in some of the products that are featured within our building. Because farmers are very savvy, and again, going back to the resiliency piece, they are trying to find ways to diversify. For some dairies as well, they may be doing beef, because we see that trend too. A lot of dairies moving into beef cattle as well. So you could have someone that's at the expo exhibiting their dairy cattle one week, beef cattle the next, and that's just another way to expand their bottom line. While it has gotten more difficult for farmers to farm, whether it's with economics or regulations, I think that the ways that states can support the farms, as well as Eastern States Exposition, is to give them opportunities. I think to be able to support them in terms of getting them to the fair, and once they're at the fair, making them feel supported in being an exhibitor at the fair is really critical. For us at the department, if there's grant programs or opportunities to support fairs with premiums or promotions, we try to do that because we know that our ag fairs are really critical venues to connect the public with our farmers and to make that connection around agriculture. So I think with many of the farms and the diversification piece, we're going to continue to see that, but it's really up to us and others that work in the space to be able to support farms and to be able to adapt as these outside factors are changing as well.
Well, that makes a great segue into my next question. If you wouldn't mind getting out your crystal ball for a moment and thinking about what does agriculture look like going forward? What does that offer for new opportunities, and certainly challenges as well, but opportunities at both, the larger Massachusetts agriculture, and certainly what those activities that happen at Eastern States.
Despite the challenges that I mentioned, I'm really optimistic about the future of agriculture, especially in our region. I think the diversification piece has set our farms up well for success. I also think the multi-generational nature and how agriculture has been a foundation in New England for hundreds of years. Farms feel that responsibility, I would say, to carry on the legacy, but also recognizing that not everyone's going to be a farmer. I knew I wasn't going to be a farmer, and I still wanted to work within the industry. So I think if there's ways that we can continue to bring individuals from non-traditional ag backgrounds into agriculture, that will help the industry as a whole. At the department, we have an Ag Youth Council that we launched last year, and it's comprised of 15 high school juniors and seniors. Some were members of 4-H or FFA, some attend agricultural high schools that we have in the state, and others are from non-traditional ag backgrounds, but very interested in learning more about the state's agricultural sector and how they can become involved. And with our first class, what we saw was that by bringing them to events, including agricultural fairs, to farms, allowing them to see how the department supports farms, it made them more informed and helped to inform their career paths. And all of them now are in college, majoring in careers, wanting to find a way that they can work in agriculture once they graduate. And that's really our hope, is that if we can help support youth and more on the youth development and workforce development side, then that will help the industry long term. And we know that labor is one of the major challenges that farms face, certainly dairy farms and livestock farms that need someone there 365. And so really that's been our goal at the department, is trying to enhance those workforce development opportunities and the awareness about agriculture. And I think that's what's going to help us long term with our resiliency in the sector.
And also another fabulous segue into another really interesting point about Eastern States. It appears that in 2024, there were 3,689 4-H participants, 3,478 FFA members over the course of the Big E, which are pretty significant numbers, and speak that youth piece that you described with your council and ongoing work, and those we're back to the connections, making those connections with some of our young people, and I would have to agree with you that the future is certainly may look different, but is exciting indeed to have that many young people involved in the various aspects. Your own 4-H experiences and showing experiences were, as you said, a big part of your background and lead up to the role that you occupy today. Generally, I ask my podcast guests to talk about an iconic cow in their history. It could be a New England Holstein cow, or it could be a cow of another color. And I don't want to anticipate what you might have for an answer there, but if you wanted to tell our listeners a little bit about iconic creature in your background.
Well, I think you may have guessed who I was going to talk about, because I will always say that a cow did change my life. And I mean that wholeheartedly. When I had the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, the cow that my mother and grandfather purchased at the Big E in 95 was the grandmother to my cow, Indian Acres Pistachio Pie, who I grew up showing in 4-H. She was actually born premature. So she was born in April. She was a premature calf, and I just kind of took to her, and she became my project heifer, and was fortunate to be able to show her in the 4-H program at the Big E and travel to county fairs and show her there. And then as she developed into a cow, I had the opportunity to show her in Harrisburg at the All-American Dairy Show, won Supreme Champion there with her in the open and junior shows. And then a few weeks later, traveled to Madison, Wisconsin, where I was the first individual to win Supreme in both the open and junior divisions. I was admittedly very shy at the time. Those experiences really brought me out of my comfort zone, meeting so many farmers from across the country and icons, truthfully, that I looked up to. and making the connections with them that I'm able to sustain today and call them friends. That experience really was a turning point for me because it brought me out of my comfort zone. I was a freshman at the time at Cornell. Throughout that time frame, right after Expo, I met more of my college classmates because of the experience and made new connections there. I was fortunate to then be able, as I said, a few years later, be on the dairy judging team. But a lot of that was from the experiences I had showing dairy cattle and growing up in 4-H with pistachio pie, kind of being there with me throughout that journey, ultimately being able to show her to the top of the class.
And again, with the connections, to think that an animal that was purchased in 1995 at Eastern States had such an outsized influence on not just your showing career, but your overall career makes a good thing for us to think about when we're in the thick of packing up or tearing down or some of the less exciting and activities that go along with the shows that at the end of the day there's some pretty amazing impacts that those activities can have. Ashley, what haven't I asked you that you feel like it would be really interesting for our listeners to learn either about Massachusetts agriculture or, the various activities that your department works with the Eastern States Expo on?
And just thinking about our department's work and working with not only Eastern states, but ag fairs across the state, it's changed a lot through the years in terms of how the fairs market to consumers. A lot of times we see the rides or the food that is top of mind in part of the promotions. And certainly that's one way to attract a demographic of people to the fairgrounds. But I think maintaining the focus that agriculture is our culture is incredibly important if we want farms to be viable and in 5, 10, 15 years still have a really strong showing of cattle and beef and sheep at the fairs. We have to continue to emphasize and focus on the impact of agriculture. What we see at the fairgrounds is a small part of our region's agricultural economy, knowing the impact and the hard work that goes into farming to producing our food. I think that's really important to continue to emphasize as consumers get more disconnected from where their food comes from. And so sharing those stories, I think, is an obligation that we have. Certainly, Eastern States does a good job of highlighting the agricultural focus. Our department really tries to share the stories, but we have to continue to share those stories so that's not lost when people visit fairs.
Thank you and your department for all the work that you do to help make Eastern States Expo kind of a preferred destination for a lot of our farm families in the Northeast and outside the region as well. It's a pleasure to be there year after year, and certainly we're very fortunate to have the venue and have the whole concept reside here in New England. So thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to record this episode, and I'm sure our listeners will be interested to enjoy it, perhaps as they travel to World Dairy Expo or some other nice short drives coming up in the next few weeks. Enjoy your Massachusetts Day on Thursday, and however many days you end up spending in the Massachusetts building. Don't be afraid to go next door and grab a Maine baked potato. I hear that they're rather tasty.
That's always on my list to do. And thanks again for the opportunity, Betsy. It's always good to connect with you. And for everyone that is traveling to Expo or traveling home from the All American this week, safe travels to everyone and look forward to seeing you at Expo.
Reminding our listeners, we do have upcoming events for the New England Holstein Association. Our convention, hosted by Connecticut Holsteins, occurs on November 1st and 2nd in Norwich, Connecticut, featuring farm tours, panel discussions, and the always lively junior contests and activities. Make plans to join us now. Find us at nesholsteins.com, Spotify, Apple Play, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite podcast episodes. Thanks again to Eastern States Exposition for sponsoring this episode.